Hey sword fans, today I have a short video for you on a sword you've seen before, but also I will be explaining the development of that sword. So the sword that I'm going to be talking about is one that was seen in one of my unboxing videos. It's a circa 1620 North European rapier. These rapiers were used in mainly Scandinavia, northern Germany and England. They were a very understated piece. They were not the big swept hilts, they were minimalist. They led to the development of smaller hilted swords, and I can understand why you would want a smaller sword because, well, smaller hilted sword, this is quite a hefty piece. Because a sword spends most of its time on your hip. If you are wearing a massive hilt, it's firstly wearing through your clothes. As someone who's worn a sword to certain events, you will get it stuck indoors. It will get caught on stairs and railings. But having a smaller piece on your hip is just a comfort thing. And you see that later with the 1796 and certain French swords with the folding guard. So, this is the sword I'm going to be talking about. This has already sold. It's going on to its new owner later this week. And it is a stunning piece. It is a gilt on iron, which is quite hard to do actually, with a gold wire chain grip and a nicely fullered ending in diamond section blade there, with its armory marking just there. This sword is quite large. It is very, well, the diamond section is quite broad. It doesn't have a lot of flex, and it cuts well, it thrusts well, it has a wicked point where it's been, well, sharpened and ground down by the maker. But the thing that's interesting about this, and you don't see these very often, is the guard. As you can see, that is just a single side ring. So this sword, as with most European swords, developed from the arming sword. And this piece developed from the side sword, which is a generally considered to be a smaller arming sword, but the side sword tended to have knuckle and side rings. This one has a single side ring, so when it is on your hip, you have nothing banging into you, but you have some protection over your knuckles, which is quite useful, because if you hold a sword in what we would now call a saber grip, you have very minimal amount of finger there, but most of your hand is on the outside. And if you are in what is called an outside guard, you have your side ring protecting. And this is the interesting thing, because there are direct descendants of this sword. And since you don't see these very often, I thought I'd show you. So, one last look at that gorgeous thing. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. We are moving on from a rapier to a shearing sword. This is, again, North European, most likely British or maybe German or Scandinavian. Some of these are found in Italy, but I feel like this one is English. Again, it has just a single guard. This one has been perforated, much like you see on walloons or certain mortuary type swords. And again, this one has a wicked point, but this one is a cutting sword. It's a cut and thrust sword, but it is heftier. It has more whack, and it wants to do more damage that way. But again, the feature I want you to focus on is this single guard. And lots of these are cut down, but this one, as you can see, was made like this. And There is about just under 100 years separating these two swords. This one is around 1680, this one is 1600. And you can find this in AVB Norman's book, dating from 1580 to 1620. I don't believe this is as early as 1580, I think it's towards the later end. And this one is from about 1650 to maybe 1700 at a push, but more like 1680. And yeah, the very similar concept. This one has a broader blade, this one is a flattened hexagon. But it's essentially the same concept. This one is just beefier, and rather than gold plated, it's silver plated. Bit more protection with a perforated plate there. But it is essentially the same sword, almost 100 years later. Slight developments for what's needed. This is a military sword, or a sword of the military class. Same as that one, but for a different kind of warfare. Moving on, we have this. This is a spadroon. So, rapier, shearing sword, spadroon. And these are true military swords. These were made for officers to carry. The others are pre-regulation, is the generally accepted term, when the officer class would carry whatever sidearm they wanted, because there were no regulation weapons to carry, except in France and some other countries where there were actual regulation weapons. But this sword is a vague patterned spadroon. And yeah, it's quite a slender blade. This one's likely circa 1760, 1770. It's slightly before the 1786 style, and likely for volunteers or yeomanry, with a nice little happy face there. But what we can see is, again, we are now going on almost 200 years of sword development in Northern Europe, and it still just has this. And not much is needed. It won't wear down your uniform. It won't bang against you as you're walking. If you walk into a door frame, it won't dig into your hip. And if you are using, again, the outside guard to protect your hand, the inside of your hand is underneath. It's very hard to get at that. And you have some protection over here. Not as much as a basket hilt, of course, basket hilts being the best weapons of all time. I will be doing a video on how, well, essentially rapiers developed into basket hilts at some point. But it's just quite interesting to have these swords all in a row. And I'm going to be moving on from that spadroon to a later spadroon, but not really a spadroon. This is a Kolishmard small sword. So as you can see, it has that very extreme taper there, going to a wicked point. So this is where you block. This is a very strong section of sword, and this is almost sharp enough to penetrate my finger just touching it. It is a wicked point, but this one is a patterned sword. This is a 1786 style spadroon hilt, and as we can see, it still has just the outer ring. And it's very interesting how these are developed just from the side sword all the way through, just to this over, well, the side sword was 500 years ago. This has had 500 years of development, and essentially all we've had is the same sword. There have, of course, there are other military style swords, but it's interesting to see that there is a direct lineage from a rapier from about 1600 to this sword from about 1786. And it's quite interesting to see. You don't see these swords put aside each other, but put next to each other quite often. But yeah, I mean, if we get close, It's just quite interesting. And I thought I would share it with you. Because unless you spend all your time in museums or you do what I do, you're not really going to see that. And there really isn't much difference. The swords all feel different. Of course, the small sword is very different. But, I mean, I wish I had a side sword to show you, but I don't have £15,000 to spare for an original. And unfortunately, I don't fence side swords, so I can't show you one of those. But the development of these swords, it went with what worked and what was needed with the time. What worked for a lot of these swords for people who weren't necessarily going to use them that much. So this is a civilian weapon that could have been used for war. And the last one was a military weapon that almost definitely was used for war. The other spadroon is likely yeomanry, so military, but also more of a policing sword. But swords of the officer class, almost 300 years, and, well, 250 years, and not much difference. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. It's just a little look into the development of the single sidering sword. I will be doing one on the double sidering sword, going through spadroons, walloons, and what else do I have? Yeah, spadroons, walloons, and small swords. Well, hope you enjoyed, and if there's anything you liked on here, this sword has sold, the other three are still available. Just let me know. Take it easy, sword fans.